All right, great. Well, let's get started. And Kyla, just so you know, I am getting some different Skypes and team messages that people are having a bit of a hard time joining, and just even from my own team. So hopefully we're going to see some more people trickling in as they get some of those issues resolved. So maybe let's just see. Hopefully that we'll see some more people being able to sign in, and we can help troubleshoot with some of them. But anyway, I want to get started today because we have a really exciting discussion. We're going to be talking about the women inclusive return on investment. And what this tool is all about. You're going to hear all about what is the tool, what's the framework. We're also going to talk about the cases that we've been working on over the past few months. And we're really excited to have one of the founders from the firms that we worked with. So we have some really great speakers here today. Before we jump into the agenda, I do want to introduce Katie Hauser. For those of you who don't know Katie, she's the Commercialization and Scaling Advisor for the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. And Katie's been really wonderful part of this team for our Women Inclusive Return on Investment team. And I'm going to hand it over to her to give a bit of an intro as we get started.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you all for being here. I hope we get those technical glitches worked out too, and we can have more folks join us. I'm apologizing to you all now that you don't get to see my face. My children continue to give me nasty germs, and you don't want to see my face right now. So that's why. There'll be another time. But thank you all for being here. This team has been very excited about this work for a long time. And your participation today on this webinar only serves to underscore how important you think it is too, which is great. Um, this work on women inclusive return on investment has been something that USAID, through the market systems and partnerships activity, has been supporting for a few years now. And it began with a recognition that the development and moral case for investing in social inclusion was well known. But there was clearly an evidence gap in terms of understanding how and in what ways these investments could make business sense as well. And I really want to emphasize that point on making business sense. Many of you here today are practitioners in private sector engagement, so this is no surprise to you. You know that if we want to be serious about our work with the private sector, we need to address both sides of the journey to sustainable and equitable development, so the social case, but also the business case. MSP first developed two research products looking at how social inclusion is measured in the private sector, as well as an evidence review of the return on investment of social inclusion. And what we found was that there's a big gap in terms of the evidence base around this. And this gap is most pronounced when you look at small and medium enterprises in lower and middle income countries. This research led to the development of the Women Inclusive Return on Investment Framework, or WE ROI, which we'll share in the chat for easy access if you haven't seen it yet. And now we're moving into a phase of putting this work into practice by identifying specific cases of businesses in lower and middle income countries that have invested in women as suppliers, customers, and staff, and working with these businesses to identify a concrete return on investment from these initiatives that they have undertaken. We think this work can benefit our colleagues within the agency designing new programs, our implementing partners as they design women inclusive interventions with the private sector, and with the businesses themselves when considering strategic investments in inclusion. You're going to hear about two such firms today, which is very exciting. I'm excited, and I'm going to pass it back over to Erin and the team to get into the details. Thanks for being here. Back to you, Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate it. We can turn to the next slide. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do a few introductions. We're going to talk through a summary of the case studies that we conducted. We're going to talk and have an interview with Green World, one of the companies that were part of the case studies. And then we're going to have hopefully some good time for Q&A. So please start posting your questions into the chat. And also during that time, we'll be more than happy for you to raise your hand, and we can call on you to unmute yourselves. So we'll have hopefully some time to answer some things. If you go to the next slide. We have some great panelists today. Just a quick introduction for myself. If you don't know me, my name is Erin. I'm a principal and owner of Market Share Associates, and I also lead on a lot of our gender and social inclusion work. I'm also the technical lead for the Market Systems and Partnerships social inclusion track. I'm really excited to have our partners on this webinar today with us who are working with us on this We ROI work. It's been such an awesome collaboration. I wish all of you could see what happens on the back end, but we have a lot of really smart people pulling this all together. But Sabine, who's on the market share team, has really been leading from the market share side on a lot of the writing and working on the cases. Yakuta, who is a really integral part of our team, is helping us so much on how to measure what does the ROI look like, organizing us, getting different university experts from business schools to give us input. So we're really aligning with up-to-date business practices on exactly how to measure ROI and making sure we have the most up-to-date practices from the business community, which is lovely. And then today we have also Selesi on the call, who is the founder of Green World in Ethiopia. And you'll get to hear Sabine do an interview with him, which is really exciting. So next slide. So we just want to give everybody a quick overview if you haven't heard of the Market Systems and Partnerships activity that's funded by USAID. It's a really exciting learning program where the purpose for us is to advance learning and good practice on market systems development and private sector engagement within USAID. So for USAID directly, also with implementing partners, and also with local market actors. There's a huge emphasis not just on creating tools, but also really thinking about uptake and how do we really work with partners to get them the types of tools that are useful for them. If you can go to the next slide. I think something that's important to point out is, there's a whole kind of partnership facility where MSP is working with local partners and doing lots of exciting work there. But there's also the learning tracks. And so that's the cool graphic that you see here. There's 5 learning tracks. So we're one, which you can see circled under the social inclusion track. That's where this team is working under. There's also some other really excellent work happening. So I'd really encourage you to go to that link on AgriLinks and check out all the exciting work being done under the transformational PSE, practical application of MSD, market systems resilience, as well as the M&E and CLA tracks. So next slide. So that brings us to today and the We ROI framework. So we're gonna go through this a bit for people who haven't seen this yet. And I know we've had a couple of other webinars and some discussions and things like that, because the framework we published a few months ago, more now. Oh my gosh, I feel like time flies. I can't even remember when we published it. But this was based on a whole year to year and a half of literature reviews, but also more excitingly, actually talking to local firms and local experts, which was so exciting. And the framework is really there to bring together, what have been some of these good practices that we've seen in country with SMEs in low and middle income countries. And the reason for that, and to try to bring a voice to that and bring what good practices have worked in those contexts, is that to date, a lot of the evidence that's been published and that's publicly available has really been from the, developing world, actually even more specifically, almost just from the United States. It's very difficult to find a lot of evidence for this globally. and mostly with large publicly owned corporations, which, as we all know, the private sector is not just one homogenous being, right? It's very diverse, and large publicly owned corporations have different incentives, different resources, different ways of working than privately owned SMEs. And so this was something we really wanted to bring a voice to, is not just what is that kind of large publicly owned multinational doing, but what's the evidence for the SMEs and LMICs, and what are they doing? What's been working for them? How do we voice there? So this,
Yeah, I think we lost you there, Aaron. One second.
can you hear me again?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, that's so weird. I have no idea what happened. Um, but anyway, you can go back to the previous slide quickly. Oops, other way. Anyway, so I just want to say what we found from gathering that evidence with the firms is that there were really kind of four quadrants of what firms and SMEs were doing in low and middle income countries. So there were talent and leadership initiatives. We saw a lot of talent and leadership development. We also saw a lot of talent acquisition, like how do you diversify your talent base? We also saw what we're calling workplace culture, which is things like care support, which you'll see in some of our cases. Interestingly, one of the most documented and kind of piloted and tried interventions was around gender-based violence response, which I thought was really interesting. And a lot of private sector firms are very interested in that. And then we also saw things around supply chain diversification, as well as around consumers and looking at like women-targeted marketing and sales and women-targeted product and service design. So those were some of the most common interventions that we saw. So next slide. So this is just, a quick thing on like, what is the framework trying to do and not trying to do? I can let people read this, but I kind of already went through some of this, but really the framework is trying to outline financial incomes for firms. So we're actually not in the framework trying to outline and measure what are the social outcomes for firms. And this isn't to say that it isn't important, because of course it is. And you'll see that some of our future work is actually going to focus on this. But we really just saw that there was just a huge gap in aligning incentives with these SMEs when this is such a core issue for small companies, which is just how do you make these initiatives sustainable? And the real way to do that with companies is to ensure that there is some form of financial outcome. So how do we make these initiatives material to these firms? And then in terms of, looking at the ROI instead of some other business metrics, this is a really important thing, because this wasn't just, that didn't come about lightly. It's actually a financial metric that we chose because it's something that allows you to measure apples to apples. So say you're a fund manager, managing a partnership facility with multiple private sector companies, looking at a WeROI or an ROI calculation can help you understand how these different interventions compare, intra-firm. So if you try a few different interventions within a firm, you can start to compare apples to apples, but it also can help you look kind of across contexts and across sectors, which is also why it's used a lot in the business world. And then lastly, I'm just going to mention we focused specifically on women. And the reason is that we wanted the framework to be as evidence-based as we could. And there was a lot less evidence yet around what does this look like when you're integrating youth-friendly interventions, LGBTQI, disabled populations. And so it's not that it's not important, and we'd love to see other people pick it up and start expanding it from a social inclusion perspective. Okay, let's keep going. I'm sure I'm probably getting behind. I could talk about all this stuff for a long time. So just super quickly, and then you'll get to hear some more lessons just on the cases. So we were really lucky and able to dig deep with Green World in Ethiopia and Okeba in Uganda. And these firms, you'll, for sure go and look them up because they're doing really cool stuff. And not just in terms of development work and the social impact that they've had, but truly their business impact as well. And I think, you'll hear from Green World today, but please do take a look at the Okeba case study. Hopefully we can pop both of those case studies in the chat. But Green World is an energy company that focuses on cook stoves and really focuses on women as their target consumer. And you'll hear more about that today. And then we looked at Okeba, which is a buying, storage, and marketing company that also has women as its core employee base. So that one's looking a little bit more as women as employees and the workplace culture part of the framework, where Green World's really looking at women as consumers and how they tailored their business model around that. And we looked for lots of different cases and really tried to find a couple that have really great interventions as well as really good data that we could base some of this on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yakuta, and she's going to talk to you more about, well, what did we find with these companies? What were some of our lessons for trying to measure the WE ROI?
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully the internet gods are going to smile on me and we won't have any more glitches. So in the case studies, you will find extended write-ups of how we calculated the VROI, but we wanted to give you a bit of flavor on this calculation on our call today itself, and get you excited to read the case studies, of course. So let's begin with our formula for the VROI. Now, the core, of course, is your traditional formula for calculating the ROI. And typically, ROIs are calculated before the investment decision is made. However, in our case, we calculated the ROI after the intervention was implemented. Now, before I get into the numerator and the denominator, the women inclusive, we ensured that these companies, the change that they made, the operational change that they made was women inclusive. And we did that through key informant interviews and developing a theory of change. And all of that is captured in our case studies. So please do read them. So let's get back to the formula. The numerator is the difference between profits per unit at the end line and the profits per unit at the baseline, where end line is the gender inclusive operation and baseline is the traditional model. So for Green World, the end line is having women sales agents sell the cook stoves within their communities and in adjoining communities from the baseline, which was a centralized model where 3 male HQ staff went and sold the cook stoves. In Okeba, the end line is having on-site high quality childcare services, and the baseline was, well, no services, no childcare for those employees who had those types of responsibilities. So that's the end line and the baseline. So just immediately from the numerator, you can see that having distinct end line and baseline timelines and models that don't overlap enable a more straightforward calculation. Now, the denominator is the initial investment cost to implement the gender inclusive operation. So again, in Green World, it's implementing the women's sales agent model. In Okeba, it's setting up and running the childcare services. And so again, immediately you can imagine how important it is for companies to record granular data on initial setup costs, such as sales agents, recruitment and training, like in the case of Greenwell, and then room cleaning, utilities, furniture, food, like in the case of Okeba. So our results, we wanted to share our results with you today, even though we are not going into the detailed calculations. So drum roll. Our calculations revealed that both companies had positive ROIs from their women inclusive operations. Now, in the case of Greenworld, we found that for every Ethiopian beer invested, the company got a 7x return. So it's a ratio of 7:1. And for Okeba, for every Ugandan shilling invested, the company got a 1.7x return. So again, a ratio of 1.7:1. These are tremendous results because they continue to build on the positive evidence for gender lens investing and furthermore strengthen the business case for such interventions with quantifiable numbers that immediately convey the value of women inclusive business models. So we're ready for the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so what we learned from our experience is that context, data management practices, data quality, organizational capacity, and leadership willingness all play critical roles in the ability to conduct a VROI calculation. So I'm sorry, there's no magic sprinkly fairy dust that I can provide, but this is so worth the effort, right? The factors are all nuanced and greatly influence not only the calculation itself, but also the amount of time needed and spent with the various teams, such as finance, HR, and leadership, to identify the correct financial metrics necessary for the calculation, the availability and granularity of the data, and to really understand what the data is telling you. So in the limited time that we have, I wanted to share two examples that highlight the contextual nature of conducting the VROI. So in the first example, in the case of Greenwell, the company kept detailed and granular level data of the fixed and variable costs, both in the women's sales agent model, so that's the new model, and the centralized model, that old model. So this means they kept records on the transportation, marketing, breakage, cook stove breakage is what I mean, printing, loading and unloading of stoves, after sale maintenance, salary, commission, and warehousing costs associated with both models. They also kept close account of the cost of recruiting and training each women's sales agents. So this was extremely helpful in developing an ROI value where we can confidently say, yes, this model closely contributed to this positive ROI. Now, in the case of Okeba, we could absolutely calculate the yield per woman sorter because in the model, what the women were doing were those who had childcare responsibilities, they were bringing their children to the on-site childcare service, and then they were actually sorting the seed and grain. So they were processing it by hand. And so we could build out the yield per woman sorter, and from there, we could develop an understanding of the reduction in labor costs, but we had to use total revenue and cost for the company and acknowledge that revenues could have increased from a number of other reasons. And so we explain in the case study that this is, again, a contribution, and we explain the limitations of reduced granularity in the availability of data. So the other thing is, and I'm going to skip a little bit in the interest of time, I want to share a second example where I want to focus on the decisions you will likely need to make when conducting a VROI calculation. So we've documented our various decisions in the case studies. So again, I encourage you to read them to get an in-depth understanding of everything I'm covering today in a very short time. But for example, in the Greenwell case, we decided to use higher cost values in the ROI calculation and be more conservative with cost estimates when we encountered increasing costs in the women's sales agent model that were due to the external environment rather than the model itself. So your typical inflation in the external environment that was pushing up transportation costs, for example. So not related to the model itself. So we consciously took steps to ensure that we were not overcrediting the ROI to the women inclusive model. So heads up, you will likely be faced with many decisions as well to ensure calculation integrity. On Okeba, we decided not to include the room costs in the denominator of the initial investment costs because through our discussions with Okeba management, we understood that this room would have lain bare if the childcare services did not operate there. So again, for the sake of our calculation integrity, we ensured that there was no opportunity cost associated with using the room before deciding to remove it from the denominator. So again, just another example of a decision that we had to make. So with that, let me please hand it over to my colleague Sabine for the most exciting part of our webinar today, which is the discussion with Seleshi. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yakuta. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. So I have the pleasure to welcome Sileshi Abebe. You've already heard he is the founder of Green World, and he's found a really innovative way to meet the energy needs of rural consumers in remote areas of Ethiopia. Good afternoon, Sileshi. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Sabina. Thank you all.
So, Sileshi, I would like to start talking about Green World a little bit, why you have founded Green World, and maybe you can also start telling us a little bit about the beginning of your journey when you first started selling cook stoves.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we started Green World, as you mentioned it, I am co-founder of Green World, and we founded Green World just to address the real energy demand in rural areas in Ethiopia. And the initiative or the idea comes because of I myself was part of the rural community, and I myself was born in a very rural area of Ethiopia. And even my family still now lives there. And yeah, the only energy access is from the solar and from the cookstoves that I am delivering. So yeah, the real initiative was the idea of the energy poverty in rural place in Ethiopia, including my village. So I was one of the victims of the energy poverty, and I personally studied chemical engineering, and I was dreaming to be biochemical engineer, but after graduating, yeah, my really impression just taken me back to my village, and yeah, I am working with the Green World just to help my mom and other moms as well, and to bring the real change with the energy solutions here. Yeah, that is the main idea.
Thanks, Sileshi. Yeah, I think when we spoke about it was the cook stoves that really caught your interest at the beginning, and you thought, you know, this is what can change things for people living remotely, especially for women. Can you tell us a little bit how you started selling cook stoves?
Yeah.
I think Yakuta has mentioned it briefly. It was a rather centralized model at the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. As you saw it in the cover page of this calculation, yeah, it's the real photo that I myself has taken when one of the mothers here digging out the root of the tree. So in Ethiopia, especially in the rural parts of Ethiopia, all the energy demands need to be fulfilled by mothers, and all the energy goes to for cooking, because other energy considerations might be taken as a luxury. And the important thing in rural parts are the cooking. And this cooking energy is fulfilled by collecting firewood from somewhere, maybe from forest if lucky enough, but unless it is from the root of the tree and from the leftovers of the agricultural products or cow dung. So working on these things might help or really help the rural mothers, because this energy poverty is taking everyone as in the climate change, in as well as myself is victim of it, and my mother. Yeah, in my family, 3 of us have asthma, and and I myself was victim on the collecting the fire. I just lost my one of my eyes, so yeah. I really tried to make a real impact, and yeah, I left my engineering background and going back to sell the stoves. Yeah, yeah, that is that. I personally understand that it really brings a solution on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Sileshi. I think everyone's glad that you took your mind to selling cook stoves. I think when Yakuta showed a little bit, that centralized model, it had problems, right? It was quite costly. It was difficult to sail. So you changed course relatively early on when you realized that you were just not meeting your sales targets when we last spoke.
Sure, Sabina. In the case of Custode, we just tried to copy it from the previous, from senior companies that have been working, not in energy, but in other cases. But we tried to copy it, but it really doesn't work. In the general marketing strategy, it doesn't work in the case of cook stores. And one of the things is that this cook store weighs about 40 or 35 to 40 kg, and taking it to the rural average with no infrastructure is very time taking, even though it is very important cook stove. And this cook stove, our national dish, we call it injera, and one of the guys might know injera in Ethiopia. So yeah, this cook stove is very helpful, but selling it in the general marketing strategy really doesn't work, because the real beneficiaries are moms, mothers in the rural village, and they are at home and they don't have any opportunity to for the promotion, or you can take it to the market to sell this stove. So the only way is availing this cook stove in the village and making this real beneficiary or the real victim, making part of this journey is we understand that it is helpful for the marketing. And it just helped us to sustain or to continue as a business organization, and that is the way.
Thanks, Sileshi. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about these village level entrepreneurs, right? These kind of how that system works, because that is what prompted our interest when we started the whole process of looking into Greenwell, getting excited about your women inclusive business model. It was very different from this previous model. Do you want to tell us very briefly about it?
Yeah, Sabina, thank you. Actually, these village level entrepreneurs are mothers in the village, and they are beneficiaries of this stove. And what they do, we just supply this stove, or we just took this stove to that village, and one who is active and influential mother can take it as an opportunity to make a commission from every sale of this cook stove. And the very important thing in this marketing in a rural village, if I was there, no one trusts me to take a product from me. But they are part of that community, and they are already there, and everyone trusts them. And it is a peer-to-peer talk, and it is word of mouth promotion. And in the village, it is seeing is believing. Actually, they just visit the kitchen of that village level woman. So we call them entrepreneurs because they are working, but technically they are working mothers in the rural village with us.
So you've got basically, you try and increase access for female consumers to cook stoves, right? That is a way where a lot of these women benefit. You've got your largely female sales agent workforce, right? They're women exclusively almost, I think, if I remember correctly. But also, I think this new business model changed your sales, right? Things started improving with that.
Yes. Sabina, the reason is because they are the user. They are the real user of this stove, and they are the real beneficiary. And plus to that, they are the real victim of the energy poverty. They know how they are suffering, and they need to use it. And they need to see the change. They need to entertain the benefit of this stove. If I try to work for example, the dad or for the father of the house, but he really don't care about the energy demand because mom is responsible for cooking and for other energy demands in the house. So he really can't be our working partner because he is not worrying for what is happening in the kitchen. He's not worrying about what is happening in the energy poverty, what that mom is facing. He don't know actually. That is really. So the only way is to if we need to make the change. If we really need to make the change, we need to work with the mothers, that is the user. and we need to train them, and we need to show them how this stove is important. Unless otherwise going and selling it with another modality is not really working for this stove.
Thanks, Sileshi. And yeah, I think that's where we then started the process, right? You told us when we first spoke, so like, this is working for us financially. And then this is where we came in, and Yakuta and the team did a lot of the calculations. And so I'd like to talk a little bit with you about this process of calculating that women inclusive return of investment. It'd be nice to hear what are the kind of main lessons you took away. And if I remember, not everything was smooth either. So, I think everyone would be interesting for you to share some of the challenges during that calculation process as well.
Yeah, Sabina, you're right. When we started, we just take it easy, but this calculation, this array calculation, helped us to check how we have been doing things. We were considering ourselves, and we was thinking that we can tell about green wallet, but it is not like that, and we don't have any. We need to refer back. Everything was in hard paper. Yeah, and on paper, and this information was really difficult to collect. And when Yakuta asked me one information, or from Jenny asked me one question, yeah, just wait me, and sometimes I just tell them to wait one more days or something else, because we need to check and go back to in my office or in other experts' office, and sometimes we need to call and ask the village level woman to send us how was the previous activities have been doing, because all these things have been recorded in hard copy, and it was really difficult for us to tell a story and to make a real calculation. And what we really took from this is that it was helpful for a company to show the data rather than finding something or talking that displaying, for example, the important that I was always proud is the picture that you showed in the cover page, because I personally took it, and I am proud to show how that woman is struggling to dig out that root of the tree. So every data needs to be in the same way and showing what Greenwald have been doing, and that was the main takeaway. And that now we are really working to organize everything, and we developed a database that was supported by mobile app, and as well it can function offline and online. Yeah, now it is very helpful for us to see how we need to talk with other like this USAID, or if it's a future, or if anyone come now. Whether online or a physical in-person visit Greenwood, now we are proud, and we can show in my PC or in the experts or in other offices, even with my mobile, I can show everything now, and that is very helpful for me. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sileshi. I would like to hear a little bit more, and I'm sure the participants as well, about this mobile app, because I think your challenge of having a lot of data, I think having business intuition, having some data, but a lot of that data is dispersed and not easily at your fingertips, right? So when you mentioned you now got this mobile app, do you want to tell people a little bit more about that and how you use it for business decisions as well?
Yeah, it's a very important mobile app at this time. Thank you for initiating us to come to this point. This mobile app actually do every activity of what we have been doing in paper. For example, if one of the village level entrepreneurs go for example, for maintenance or for market promotion or selling or installing of this stove in a village, in the kitchen of someone else. Yeah, this we can track what she was doing in that day, because she needs to own this her mobile. She needs to own the app and on the location, and we can track what she is really doing. Plus to that, we have about 230,000 sales. That means we have 230,000 customers in hard paper. So we just converted to this database, and now I can call. I don't need to go back to the paper to contact someone when I need to visit. I can check on my mobile. I can check the GPS location. I can check the phone number, and I can check the customer phone number. I can check the representative, I mean the village level entrepreneur who installed or who sold that stove. And everything was now easy. And we are also trying other integrating the PEGO models at this time, but it is now coming, and we will see it in the coming future, maybe after 6 or months or something like that. But it's very helpful now.
That sounds really good. And you know, we like data. So we got very, very excited when you told us about the app. I think as a last question, I really wanted to go back to, you know, the calculation showed that you have a very, very large return of investment of this new business model, right? On every Ethiopian birr invested, the calculation showed that you got almost 7 back. Now, this is big. When you think back on your kind of like business intuition, did you expect the results to be as they were, or did they come as a surprise to you?
Sabina, just to be frank, we just started this model just to sell this store and to make life easy, because the village customers, the community, we planned that the community have a contact point rather than looking for Greenwald to go from Addis Ababa or from the regional cities to the village. We just planned to put someone responsible in the village, and we haven't expected such a revenue at that time. But when we started it, we just we just incorporated other things rather than transporting from urban areas. We just started manufacturing the stoves in the village. One thing that increased the profit, and the other thing, lots of costs are reduced. We just transport these stoves in bulk and store it in the center of the village, and in the village maybe 5, 7, or sometimes 20 entrepreneurs work in that village, in surrounding village. And controlling it was somehow very easy for us, and it helped us, and it is a surprise plus a strategic move. Yes, I can put it this way.
Oh, thanks, Sileshi. Sounds great. I think I'll just stop here because I'm sure there's lots. We want to make sure there's enough time for Q&As, and I already saw in the chat there are lots of questions for you. But let me finish by thanking you again for joining us today. I know you've got business to run, so you're very, very busy. So thanks so much for taking the time. And back to Erin so we can get to some of the Q&A. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, that was wonderful. Thanks, you guys. I think I learned a couple of things that I hadn't heard before from some of our other interviews. So I really appreciated that. And you guys have a very natural dynamic talking with each other. So that's really lovely. There are a lot of really interesting questions coming in, and I'm certain that we have a lot of very smart people on this call. So I'd love to start answering a few of these questions. One of the first ones I thought I might throw to somebody is around how are we calculating profit? So Yakuta, I thought maybe you could give us an answer just briefly, because I know this question actually could probably go on and could, forever. But what is your brief response to how we're calculating profit with some of the different firms?
Yeah, so we're looking, profit is revenue minus costs, right? And then costs we're breaking down into fixed and variable costs for where the company can provide us for this data. But I think what I want to highlight is this is a VROI. So the women inclusive piece is a very important part of the equation. And what we did over there is we had multiple calls, multiple KIIs with the company leadership. So for example, with Sileshi, to understand, okay, what are the social impacts on women? And then find appropriate financial proxies, because we're calculating profits from the perspective of the company, right? So we found financial proxies that would be included in the revenues and the costs, and so that it could be captured there. And so, for example, we're looking to understand, okay, the women are in Greenwell's model, the women are earning a commission per stove that they're selling, and that's included in the variable cost to the company, right? And so labor costs are being captured in that way. I'll pause there. I hope I've interpreted the question correctly.
Yeah, I think that's great. And oh, it's Leslie. Hold on one second, because I have another question I want to ask you. There's a lot of good questions. I just want to note, to add to what Yakuta is saying, something that's really important is how we calculate profit for different firms is different based on how the firm is looking at it based on their costs, right? And their returns. So it's not like one unified model, which is really important, right? So you can look in those case studies, and there's actually quite a bit of detail in both of those cases to look at, like, what did that look like for Green World versus what did that look like for Okeba? And I think that can be really interesting to look at both. I want to keep moving on because I know we only have 10 minutes and there's lots of interesting questions. Celeste, there's a question to you from Brian about when you've switched over from, this more centralized model to a decentralized model, have you seen any increased interest by investors? And is this something that you're looking for?
Thank you for the question. Actually, when we moved from the centralized to decentralized, the real change is the trust we got from the village. That was a very important thing, and it really increased the sales. Because when you go to the village, you will even sometimes sales person visit a village, but they might not even have the chance to talk with anyone because the villages have their own schedule for everything, and you don't need to. And the worst thing in rural villages of Ethiopia, the settlement pattern of the households is scattered, and it is very difficult to go from one household to another household. So trying to make a sale in this village was a bit difficult, and sometimes no one trusts to open door and to talk. And in rural villages, there is also some social norms that need to be really considered to talk with them. So just penetrating such a thing was somehow difficult. But when we started to sell the stocks with the village level woman, we just get the trust, and every member of that village was interested to buy the stocks. But when we started this thing, yes, government and NGOs started to approach us to work together and to help us on the process of the sale and addressing the energy poverty in rural areas. But the other investors not really approaching us because in East Africa, especially in Ethiopia, someone who have money need to make a real easy business, and this energy case is not that much interest of investors also for the rich. So investors is approaching for us.
And Celeste, I know you went into this, and I know in the final synthesis paper, there's some things about how did you use the We ROI, because I think you're starting to get to that, just about actually being able to document and verify these ROI calculations. And I know you guys started to talk about that a bit in the interview, but maybe you could just expand on that a little bit. Like, what were some of the how are some of the ways you want to use it moving forward? Did it change some of what you're doing? Maybe you can talk to us just for a second about that too.
Yeah. If the question was after this calculation, if it was after the calculation, it is yes. because previously we were working with the Netherlands Enterprise Agency for the marketing of stoves in rural parts of Ethiopia. And we have been doing, they do have the auditor and we the verification process, and we were reporting things. We were collecting our subsidy from Arvio, JZ, and from other companies. But when this report was released, it is really convincing. And it showed and it opened eyes for other companies. For example, more 3-4 companies are now trying to work with us, especially in the carbon credits, because these stoves reduces about 65-70% carbon. It reduces about 55% firewood, but we haven't been using it for carbon credit generation. So companies are now coming, and we released it on LinkedIn, and we released it on our website. And companies that referred these things are now coming, and after this calculation or this report, is really helping Greenwald to have other partners.
Well, we love hearing that, and we love hearing that there's some benefit for, all the time you spent with us, which we know you guys are busy. But I think it's just exciting to start having that kind of data, right, that you can share with others and start thinking about how to use that, right, to expand some of your business. So I think that finding for us was also exciting to hear. I do want to ask Sabine something from Anastasia. Oops, now there's a lot more questions. I just lost it. Give me 1 second here. I just want to use your exact language. But there's a question here that says, how do you know if it was the women inclusive model or something else that caused the difference between the baseline and end line? And I thought this is really a great question because we thought a lot about this, and it's actually a really important question. And maybe you can speak a little bit about some of the contribution analysis work and why we tried to make that as kind of simple and doable, and maybe not doing kind of attribution analysis. And maybe you can talk about that for a minute.
Sure, Erin. Yeah, I was hoping we'd get that question. I think it always is really difficult because you've got all these external factors, right? Especially in rapidly moving environments where you've got a lot of things you can't control for. And I think the two cases were quite different in that. So maybe after I've said my piece, Yakuta could come in as well, who knows a lot more about Okeba than I do. So part of the answer is for Green World, you have a very clear time distinction between the kind of previous centralized model and then the inclusive business model, the women inclusive business model. So I think that is one part of the question answered, that you stop one business strategy before you start another one. But we generally appreciated that there is a problem in controlling for a lot of the factors. So we used aspects of contribution analysis, which for us meant we drew up a detailed theory of change where we documented all of the inputs the company puts into this new business strategies, looked at kind of intermediary business outcomes, and then ultimately at impact. So we looked at all the investments, for example, Celestia and his team made, training of the sales agent, then we looked at sales agent performance, and then ultimately of kind of like, the sales, the impact on the business and the turnover. So by kind of quite logically going through this impact logic, we used qualitative data to kind of complement our quantitative data and just establish a little bit the kind of the logic of it. I think that's what we tried to do because we knew we couldn't do a credible attribution analysis. Maybe I'll stop here, and Yakuta, I'm sure you've got things to add here, or Erin.
Well, wait, let's go to the next question because I think that's a good answer. But it's a really important one. And of course, that's the part of why it's not just an ROI calculation, right? But it's a we ROI calculation. So as the question suggests, which I think is a smart question, is how did we know that it was actually benefiting women, right? And how did we do that? So these are part of the ways that we tried to look at that prior to looking at financial performance. So we did use some secondary data analysis. We developed theories of change. But we weren't doing a whole exploration on the social impact prior. Now, if you were going to do this in an extremely rigorous way, you could do that, and that would be lovely. But as we all know, in our development work, that can be really hard, and sometimes good enough can work so that we can actually get things done within the timeframes that we have within our project. So those are some of the things that we were looking at in this tool, is like, what is actually good enough for us to be able to move forward? Why, that's why we're using contribution analysis instead of attribution, which if you were doing this for academic purposes and just for research for more research sake, there's a lot of different methods you can use, and that can be really useful. But we're doing this because we want practitioners to be able to pick this up, and we want businesses to be able to pick this up and say like, hey, what's the way I can do this that's simple, that can get me going and really getting something that's deep and good enough for me to really have good data and move forward with it. I know we only have three more minutes. So I was hoping we could get to a few more questions, but we can try to answer some in the chat. I did want to mention that in terms of the SME selection and how we go about selecting these firms, we actually have a whole case study. And I was thinking, I don't know if somebody can post it in the chat, that's just on vetting and selecting. And I think one of our biggest takeaways there is that actually you really don't need to be a social enterprise. And to be honest, actually, sometimes these calculations are a lot easier when you're not a social enterprise, because when you're a social enterprise, so many of these things are conflated. So to be able to pull them apart and look at these interventions separately actually gets more complicated. But when an intervention is working with a firm that's kind of more strictly business and they're introducing a women inclusive intervention, that can actually be easier to calculate. So we would highly encourage it with those types of firms too. But in terms of the firms we selected, we really went for looking for diversity in that. But I know we only have 2 more minutes. So I just thought maybe from the panelists, if each of you just had one thing you want people to take away from your experience in this process, and you have to say it really quickly since we have a minute. Maybe I'll start with Celeste. What's one thing you want the panelists to take away, just in kind of a couple of sentences?
Yeah, if there is anyone, especially enterprise, just like Green Knowledge, and if there is a leader in this webinar, I just want to say that it is better if the data speaks, and having a good data is important to work with anyone, and we learned that. And yeah, it is very helpful to have data near, like in computer or in mobile. And yeah, let's try to have important data and let the data speak. Yeah, that is much better.
Yeah, I love that. That's a big finding overall. It's just data capabilities, good data, how to support and work with firms on that journey. And Sabine, what's one of your takeaways?
I think my takeaway was that during the calculation process, as important as data is, it is also not just a technical exercise, right? The relationship between us as the team calculating and the Greenwell team was absolutely essential to get the good data, to get clarification, to get qualitative explanation for some of the questions the quantitative data threw up. So it's also a relationship the relationship that really matters. It's not just a technical data crunching exercise.
Great, thank you. And Yakuta?
Yeah, I think, Celeste and Sabine covered the data points really well. So I want to take everyone one step back, and the work done to develop the theory of change, to identify the relevant data and to ensure that these are really women inclusive models. I think that's my big takeaway.
Yeah, I totally agree. The developing the theory of change together with the companies was really impactful, I think. And I think just to close out, I want to thank everyone for their time. I know everybody's really busy, so thank you so much. I would just say, from our lens, this was a really excellent exercise in getting to work with these companies and really getting to dig in, and the transparency that they shared with us is so huge in being able to get this data. So thank you so much. And also, I think one of our biggest takeaways is that this isn't only relevant to researchers, right? It's very relevant for ex post impact evaluations and ex post, case studies like we did. But looking at this on, how could a fund manager use this to integrate some of this thinking actually at the start of some of our investments as development practitioners, and utilize this to monitor investments across a portfolio is incredibly important. So as you see some of our work moving forward and you see some of the things we're going to do next, that's some of the guidance that we really want to start thinking about and developing, because we just found working with some of these firms that part of it can be extremely useful as well. So anyway, with that, I want to close. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.